The monster in the shadows. The battlefield was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that made soldiers nervous. Smoke still rose from the burning wreckage of tanks and buildings. The war had raged for years, but now something had changed. The monster was here. Commander Ethan Cross gripped his rifle tightly as he moved through the ruins of the abandoned city. His squad followed behind, eyes scanning every shadow. They had all heard the stories. The creature that hunted humans like prey. It was fast, strong, and impossible to kill. It had wiped out entire squads before anyone could even scream. Some called it a demon. Others believed it was not real. But Ethan had seen the reports. It was real. And tonight, he would find it. "Stay sharp," he whispered into his communicator. "If you see anything, call it in." The squad spread out, moving through the shattered remains of what was once a human colony. The war between humans and the Xelari had lasted for decades, but this creature was different. It was not fully Xelari, not fully human. No one knew where it came from. Then Ethan saw it. A dark figure crouched on a ruined rooftop, barely visible against the night sky. Yellow eyes glowed in the darkness, watching him. Ethan's blood turned cold. The stories were true. The monster was real. The hunter and the hunted. "Contact," Ethan shouted, raising his rifle. His squad turned, aiming their weapons at the figure. But before anyone could fire, the creature moved. It leaped from the rooftop, landing silently on the ground below. No sound, no warning, just pure speed. The soldiers opened fire. Bullets tore through the air, but the monster was faster. It darted between shadows, impossible to track. One soldier screamed as he was pulled into the darkness. Then silence. "Fall back," Ethan ordered. His squad obeyed, retreating toward an old bunker. But Ethan didn't move. He stood his ground, rifle raised, eyes locked on the creature as it stepped into the dim light. It was not what he expected. The monster was tall, powerful, with armor-like skin and sharp claws. But it was not just a beast. There was intelligence in its eyes. Pain. Ethan hesitated. This thing had killed humans before, but now, standing in front of him, it did not attack. It watched him. He heard a whisper through his communicator. "Commander, take the shot." His finger tightened on the trigger. But then he saw it. Behind the creature, a wounded human soldier lay on the ground, bleeding. The monster turned, looking at the injured man, then slowly backed away. It was not attacking. It was leaving. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. No, that was not what a monster did. The moment of truth. "Commander." His squad's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Do we have permission to fire?" Ethan didn't answer. He was staring into the creature's eyes. Something was wrong. If this thing was a mindless killer, why had it spared the wounded soldier? Why had it not finished them all? The monster tilted its head, as if waiting for his decision. For a brief moment, Ethan saw something he did not expect. Fear. The realization hit him like a bullet. This was no monster. This was something else. "Hold your fire," Ethan said at last. His squad went silent. The creature studied him for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. Gone. Ethan lowered his rifle. His heart pounded in his chest. Everything he had been told was a lie. This was not a monster. It was something much more dangerous, something that should not exist. And now he had to know the truth. The truth behind the monster. The night was quiet again. Too quiet. Commander Ethan Cross stood in the middle of the ruined city, staring at the spot where the creature had disappeared. His squad was waiting for his orders, but he couldn't speak. His mind was spinning. This was all wrong. The reports had described a ruthless killer, a monster that hated humans, but what he had just seen didn't match. The creature had spared a wounded soldier. It had looked at him, not like a beast, not like an enemy, but like something else, something afraid. "Commander." Ethan turned to his second-in-command, Sergeant Willis, who was watching him with concern. "We should go after it," Willis said. "We have the numbers, if we move now." "No." Ethan's voice was firm. "We're not chasing it." Willis frowned. "But, sir, I said no." Ethan took a deep breath. His instincts screamed at him that there was more to this than what command had told them. He had fought in too many wars to ignore his gut feeling now. "Get everyone back to the base," he ordered. "We're done here." Willis hesitated but nodded. "Yes, sir." As the squad moved out, Ethan glanced at the dark alley one last time. The creature was gone, but he could still feel its presence, watching from somewhere unseen. And for the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't sure if the real monster was the one hiding in the shadows, or the one giving orders back at command. The hunt begins. The military base was cold. White walls, metal floors, no warmth, no soul. Ethan sat alone in his quarters, staring at the classified files on his screen. He had read them 3 times already, but the words didn't make sense. The creature had no real name. The reports called it Subject Zero, created in a top-secret facility. Purpose: unknown. Ethan frowned. The government had told the soldiers that the creature was an alien weapon, something the enemy had unleashed. But if that was true, why was it on a human colony? And why did the files mention Project Dominion? He tapped on the screen, opening a restricted file. A security warning flashed. Access denied. Authorization required. Ethan leaned back. Someone was hiding something big. Before he could dig deeper, his door slammed open. Willis rushed in, out of breath. "Sir, you need to see this." The evidence no one was supposed to see. The security room was dimly lit. Screens lined the walls, each showing grainy surveillance footage from the city they had just left. Willis hit a button, and the footage rewound. This was taken 2 nights ago. The video played. At first, it was just an empty street. Then, movement. The creature stepped into the light. Its body was covered in dark armor-like skin, but its posture, it wasn't attacking. It was hiding, looking around, scanning its surroundings. Then something else appeared. Not humans, not soldiers. Ethan's breath caught. They were machines. Large, humanoid war droids, marked with the insignia of the United Earth Military. The footage showed the machines firing first. The creature fought back, moving with terrifying speed, but it wasn't the one who started the fight. Ethan clenched his jaw. "We were told it was an enemy," Willis muttered, "but that thing was running. It wasn't hunting. It was being hunted." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. His worst fear had just been confirmed. The military hadn't been sent to kill a dangerous alien. They had been sent to cover up something bigger. The monster that wasn't a monster. Ethan couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the moment over and over again. The way the creature had looked at him. The way it had spared the soldier. The way it had run instead of killing them all. If it wasn't the real enemy, then what was it? His communicator beeped. A message. Unknown sender. He frowned and opened it. Just 3 words. "You need to know." Attached was a location. Deep in the ruins, far from military bases or war zones. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Someone wanted him to find something. And deep in his gut, he knew this was connected to the creature. He grabbed his gear. It was time to find the truth. In the darkness, the truth awaits. The city was colder at night, silent, watching. Ethan moved carefully, keeping to the shadows. He didn't tell this squad. This mission was his alone. When he reached the coordinates, he found an abandoned bunker, half buried under rubble. The metal door was rusted, but it opened with a low hiss. Inside, it was dark. The air was thick with dust and something else, secrets buried for too long. Then he heard it. A whisper. A voice not human. He turned sharply, his weapon raised. But what he saw stopped him cold. The creature was there. Not in attack stance. not hunting. Waiting. Yellow eyes locked onto him. A silent challenge. Ethan took a slow breath. No turning back now. He stepped inside. The betrayal of humanity. The bunker smelled of rust, damp air, and something older, something forgotten. Commander Ethan Cross moved carefully, his boots making almost no sound on the cold metal floor. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing broken consoles, shattered glass, and cables hanging from the ceiling like dead vines. The creature was still there, standing at the far end of the room. Its yellow eyes glowed softly in the dim light, watching him. It didn't move. It didn't attack. Ethan slowly lowered his rifle. "Who are you?" he asked. The creature didn't answer, not with words. Instead, it turned and pressed a clawed hand against the wall. A hidden mechanism activated. The wall slid open, revealing something Ethan had never expected to see. A human, or at least what was left of one. The hidden experiment. The man in the chamber was barely alive. Tubes and wires ran through his body, keeping his failing organs functioning. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his bones. His eyes fluttered open, locking onto Ethan's face. Ethan felt his chest tighten. This man had been here for years. But how? And why? The creature stepped back, waiting, as if it knew this moment would come. Ethan swallowed hard and then stepped forward. "Who did this to you?" The man opened his mouth, but his voice was a cracked whisper. "They lied." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Who lied?" he asked. "The government." A long pause, a slow, painful breath. Then, "They made her, and then they tried to erase her." Ethan looked at the creature. It was watching him carefully, waiting to see what he would do. Her. Not it. Not a monster. A person. A weapon born. A weapon betrayed. The man struggled to keep speaking. Every word was a battle. But he needed Ethan to hear the truth. He had been a scientist, one of the lead researchers on a secret project, Project Dominion. Years ago, humanity had discovered an alien species known as the Xilari. They were stronger, faster, and had the ability to adapt in ways humans never could. So Earth's leaders decided to create something better, a hybrid. Not quite human, not quite Xilari, something in between, a living weapon. They grew her in a lab, trained her, tested her limits. They wanted a perfect soldier, a being that could win wars before they even began. But something happened. She didn't become a weapon. She became aware. She began to question. She began to feel. And when she refused to kill on command, when she defied orders, they tried to destroy her. They erased her memories, the man whispered, hunted her down like an animal. His gaze locked onto Ethan's. But she's not the monster. They are. Ethan turned to the creature, the woman, the experiment, the survivor. And suddenly, everything made sense. The classified files, the lies from command. She had been created, and when she refused to be their puppet, they had turned on her. The war machine hunts its own. Ethan's communicator buzzed. He hesitated before answering. "Cross," he said, forcing his voice to stay steady. A voice on the other end, General Hawthorne, his commanding officer. "Commander, we have a problem." Ethan kept his eyes on the creature. "What kind of problem?" "We lost contact with your squad. We're picking up strange readings near your location. Possible enemy movement." Ethan clenched his jaw. He knew what this meant. They weren't sending help. They were sending a kill team. "Understood," Ethan said, keeping his tone neutral. "I'll handle it." "Good." And Cross. The general's voice turned cold. "If you find the target, finish the job." The call ended. Ethan exhaled slowly. They knew. They had been watching him, waiting to see if he would turn against them. And now, they were coming to clean up their mess. The impossible choice. Ethan turned to the wounded scientist. "We have to move. Now." The man nodded weakly. "She saved me," he murmured, "when they tried to kill me for knowing too much." He looked at the creature again. She's not a killer. Not like them. Ethan already knew that. The creature, the woman, had spared his men, spared an injured soldier, and now he knew why. She wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting to survive. And now she was staring at him. Waiting. For what? For him to prove what kind of man he was. Ethan took a slow breath. He had spent his whole life following orders, believing he was fighting for the right side. But now he saw the truth. The real enemy wasn't the alien standing in front of him. The real enemy was the system that made her, used her, and tried to erase her when she refused to obey. A distant rumble shook the bunker. They were coming. Ethan looked at the creature and made his decision. "We fight," he said. Her yellow eyes flickered, not with fear, not with anger, but with hope. For the first time, she wasn't alone. For the first time, someone believed in her. And for the first time, Ethan was no longer fighting for humanity. He was fighting for the truth. The monster fights back. The bunker trembled. Dust fell from the cracked ceiling. Ethan listened carefully, his military instincts taking over. The distant rumble wasn't just the wind. It was the sound of approaching war machines. They were here. The kill team. The government had sent soldiers, drones, and war droids to erase any trace of what they had done. Ethan turned to the scientist, Dr. Elias Voss, who was still struggling to breathe. The tubes and wires keeping him alive had already started to fail. He was running out of time. Then he looked at her, the creature, the experiment, the woman they had once called a weapon. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. Her yellow eyes flashed in the darkness as she moved toward the bunker's entrance, her powerful body tense like a coiled spring. She knew what was coming. She had spent her whole life running from it. But tonight, she wouldn't run. Tonight, she would fight. The war machine unleashed. Ethan checked his rifle, then pulled a second weapon from his belt, a sidearm, fully loaded. He handed it to Dr. Voss. "You might need this." The scientist shook his head. "I was never trained to fight." Ethan locked eyes with him, then learned fast. The ground rumbled again. A distant, mechanical whine filled the air, the sound of drones scanning the area. Then, a voice. Cold, metallic, inhuman. Targtocatd. Termination protocol LINITAHD. A massive explosion ripped through the bunker entrance, sending debris flying. Ethan hit the ground hard, covering his head as fire and dust filled the room. When he looked up, the doorway was gone. In its place stood a hunter droid, 7 feet tall, its armored plating glinting in the dim light, its red eyes locked onto them, scanning for threats. Then it raised its weaponized arm. A low hum built up, the sound of a charging plasma cannon. They were seconds from death. And then she moved, faster than Ethan had ever seen any living thing move. She lunged at the droid, her claws slicing into its metal frame before it could fire. Sparks exploded as she ripped the cannon from its arm, using brute force. The droid tried to retaliate, but she was too fast, too strong. She tore into it, metal shrieking, as she ripped its head from its body. Ethan had seen many battles. He had fought against impossible odds. But he had never seen anything like this. She wasn't just fighting. She was destroying them. And she wasn't even using a weapon. The kill team arrives. The first droid fell, but more were coming. Ethan could hear them outside, the sound of heavy boots and mechanical whirs as soldiers and machines moved in formation. The government wasn't taking chances. They weren't sending just 1 or 2 droids. They were sending an entire battalion. Ethan grabbed Dr. Voss and pulled him toward a secondary exit hatch on the far side of the bunker. It was old, rusted, barely functioning, but it was their only way out. Then he turned to her. She was already covered in battle scars, dark alien blood dripping from a wound on her shoulder. But she didn't slow down. She was born for war. And now, she was unleashing hell. "We need to move," Ethan shouted over the noise. She looked at him for half a second, then nodded. Together, they ran. Escape through fire. The hatch barely opened. The metal groaned as Ethan forced it apart, and the three of them slipped through into an underground tunnel. Above them, the sound of gunfire and explosions filled the night. "They're destroying everything," Dr. Voss panted as they ran. "They don't want anyone knowing the truth." Ethan already knew that. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a massacre. "They're going to keep coming," Ethan muttered, glancing at the creature beside him. "Until you're dead." She didn't flinch. She already knew. But then she spoke. A voice that was low, rough, alien, but unmistakably female. "They won't stop." Ethan stared at her. She had never spoken before. But now, as fire and death rained down above them, she had finally broken her silence. And her voice was filled with something he hadn't expected. Not fear. Not rage. Purpose. A last stand or a new war. The tunnel opened up into the ruins of the city, and Ethan immediately scanned the area. The government's forces were everywhere. Drones scanning rooftops, soldiers moving in squads, war droids patrolling the streets. There was no way out. And then Ethan realized something. This wasn't just about hunting her down. This was a war against the truth. The people in power were so afraid of what she represented, they were willing to wipe out an entire colony just to keep it buried. Ethan clenched his fists. He had spent his life following orders, believing that war was fought for the right reasons. But now he was standing beside the very thing he had once been sent to destroy. And he knew. This war wasn't about saving humanity. It was about controlling it. Ethan turned to her. "What's your name?" She hesitated. For the first time, there was something almost human in her expression. Then softly, she said, "Kayla." Ethan nodded. "Well, Kayla, we're not running anymore." She met his gaze. A silent understanding passed between them. The war machine had turned against its masters, and for the first time in her life, Kayla wasn't fighting alone. She was fighting back. The secret that could change everything. Smoke drifted through the ruins. The city burned behind them. Ethan Cross crouched behind a half-collapsed wall, his heart pounding as he scanned the streets. War droids moved in calculated formations, their red scanning beams sweeping the area, searching for any sign of movement. They weren't leaving until Kayla was dead. Beside him, Kayla, the so-called monster humanity had feared, was silent but alert, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She wasn't afraid. She never was. Dr. Elias Voss knelt on the ground, coughing, his frail body struggling to keep up. He had risked everything to tell them the truth. And that truth had changed everything. Ethan's rifle was low on ammo. His body ached from the last battle. But his mind was sharp. He knew the reality of war. Sometimes it wasn't about who had more firepower. Sometimes it was about who knew the right secrets. And Kayla, she was the biggest secret of all. "We need to move," Ethan whispered. "Now." Kayla nodded. No hesitation. No fear. She had spent her whole life running from the people who created her. But now she was ready to face them. A memory not meant to return. The tunnels beneath the city were dark, damp, and forgotten by time. They had once been part of an old water system, but now they were a perfect escape route. Or a trap. Ethan led the way, his military instincts warning him with every step. He knew the government wasn't just hunting Kayla. They were watching him too. But as they walked deeper, Kayla suddenly stopped. Her fingers brushed against the wall. Her breathing slowed. Then her body stiffened. Ethan turned to her. "Kayla." Her glowing eyes flickered like a glitch in a machine. And then, memories flooded back. Kayla fell to her knees, gripping her head as images slammed into her mind. She saw herself in a lab, surrounded by scientists. She saw Dr. Voss standing over her, arguing with someone. She saw herself as a child, a small, frightened thing, locked in a glass chamber, begging to be let out. And then she saw something worse, something she wasn't supposed to remember. She wasn't the first. There had been others. Dozens. Hundreds. All of them gone. Their bodies discarded like failed experiments. Her breathing grew ragged. Her claws scraped against the floor. She wasn't special. She wasn't unique. She was just the last one left. The horror of Project Dominion. Dr. Voss knelt beside her. His voice was weak, but steady. "Kayla, what do you remember?" She slowly lifted her head. Her eyes burned with something new, something more than rage. Grief. She spoke, her voice quiet but sharp. "There were others." Voss inhaled sharply. "You remember?" Kayla nodded. "They killed them all." Ethan gritted his teeth. He had already known that the government was hiding something big. But this was genocide. "How many?" Ethan asked. Kayla closed her eyes, as if trying to silence the ghosts of the past. "Hundreds," she whispered. "Maybe more." Ethan clenched his fists. "And the people who did this, they're still in power." Dr. Voss nodded solemnly. "Yes, and they won't stop. Not until they erase every trace of what they did." Ethan's stomach twisted. Kayla wasn't just their target. She was evidence. The real enemy revealed. A distant boom shook the tunnels. Dust fell from the ceiling. Ethan's earpiece buzzed to life. It was General Hawthorne. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Cross," the general said, as if they were having a casual conversation. "I know you're listening." Ethan didn't answer. The general chuckled. "We both know where this is going, son. You have something we want. Hand over the experiment, and I'll make sure you don't die down there." Kayla's body tensed. Her claws extended slightly, her instincts screaming that this was a trap. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He had served under General Hawthorne for years. Respected him. Trusted him. Now he could hear the lie in his voice. Ethan finally responded. "You told us she was a monster." The general sighed. "And that's exactly what she is." Ethan looked at Kayla. She wasn't a monster. She was a survivor. She had been built for war, but she wasn't the one who had started it. She wasn't the one who had wiped out her own kind. She wasn't the one hunting people just to hide the truth. The real monsters were the ones giving the orders. Ethan tightened his grip on his rifle. "I'm not giving her to you." There was a long silence. Then the general's voice came back, colder than before. "Then you're both going to die." The tunnels exploded. The final stand begins. The force of the blast sent Ethan, Kayla, and Voss crashing to the ground. Rocks fell, flames roared, and the tunnel collapsed behind them. They were trapped. Or at least, that's what the general thought. Ethan groaned as he pushed himself up. His ears rang. His vision blurred. But then he saw her. Kayla. She was already on her feet, her eyes glowing like fire, her muscles coiled like a predator ready to tear through the darkness. Ethan forced himself to stand. They weren't dead yet. And if they were going to go down, they weren't going alone. Kayla turned to him. For the first time, she didn't just look like a soldier. She looked like a leader. "They won't stop," she said, her voice steady. "They'll keep coming." Ethan met her gaze. "Then let's end this." She extended her clawed hand. For the first time, Ethan took it. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The war against lies. The world above was burning. Ethan, Cross, and Kayla stood at the edge of the ruined tunnel, looking up at the destruction the government had unleashed. The city, once a colony built for peace, was now a war zone. Smoke choked the sky. Explosions thundered in the distance. They weren't just hunting Kayla anymore. They were erasing everything. Behind them, Dr. Elias Voss struggled to keep up, his breath shallow, his frail body barely holding together. He was the last living scientist from Project Dominion, the only person who knew the full truth. And because of that, they wanted him dead. Ethan checked his weapon. Low on ammo. His body ached, exhaustion creeping in, but he couldn't stop now. They were done running. "We need to move," Ethan said, scanning the horizon. "There's a safe house about 5 miles from here. We can regroup, find transport, and—" "No." Kayla's voice was quiet but firm. Ethan turned to her. Her golden eyes burned like embers in the dark. "No more hiding," she said. "No more running." She pointed toward the center of the city, where the tallest structure stood, a massive government tower, untouched by the destruction around it. "Command HQ." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "That's suicide." Kayla didn't blink. "They started this war. We end it." Ethan exhaled slowly. His military mind told him it was a bad plan, but his instincts told him something else. She was right. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice, the secret that could change everything. The Command HQ was the most heavily guarded place in the colony, but Ethan knew how it worked, how the guards moved, how the security systems operated. Getting in would be hard. Getting out would be impossible. But Kayla wasn't interested in escape. She wanted the world to see the truth. As they moved through the ruins, Ethan activated his comms, switching to a secure military frequency. If he was going to betray his former superiors, he needed someone on the inside. A familiar voice answered. "Captain Sarah Briggs." "Cross." Briggs sounded shocked. "What the hell are you doing on this channel? There's a kill order on you." Ethan didn't hesitate. "They lied to us, Briggs. Everything about this mission. It was a setup. Kayla isn't our enemy. She never was." A long silence. Then, "You better have proof," she said. "We do." Ethan looked at Dr. Voss, who clutched a small data chip in his shaking hands. "This chip has everything," the scientist murmured. "Project Dominion. The experiments. The cover-ups. If we broadcast it, they won't be able to hide anymore." Briggs cursed. "You're telling me the war we've been fighting was built on a lie?" "Yes," Ethan said. "And I need your help." Another long pause. Then, finally, "I'll see what I can do." The transmission cut out. Ethan exhaled, knowing he had just made a dangerous gamble. If Briggs was truly on their side, she could buy them time. If not, they were already dead. The final infiltration. Ethan and Kayla moved fast, using the shadows to avoid patrols. They had no time to waste. The Command HQ loomed before them, its steel walls rising like a fortress. Drones hovered above, scanning every inch of the perimeter. Elite Omega troopers patrolled the entrance, their armor reinforced, their weapons built to kill anything that moved, including Kayla. Ethan pointed toward a side entrance, his voice low. "That's our best shot." Kayla didn't answer. She just moved. Within seconds, she was on them. Before the guards could react, she ripped through them like a storm, her claws slicing through armor, her movements too fast for them to counter. One tried to radio for backup, but Ethan shot him first. The bodies hit the ground. Kayla wiped blood from her claws and looked at him. "Are you hesitating?" Ethan reloaded his rifle. "If I was, they'd still be breathing." She gave him a sharp nod. Approval. Then they entered the building. The heart of the beast. Inside, the halls were eerily quiet, too quiet. They moved quickly, following Voss as he led them toward the main control room, the place where they could broadcast the truth. But before they reached it, the lights flickered. And then the voice came. "General Hawthorne. I expected better from you, Cross." Ethan froze. The sound was coming from every speaker in the building. The general's voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a man who had already won. "You really think you can stop this?" Hawthorne continued. "You think one data chip can bring down the entire system?" Ethan and Kayla exchanged a look. They kept moving. Hawthorne chuckled. "You don't understand, do you?" The doors slammed shut behind them. The walls hummed. Power surged through the building. And then, the floors opened up. War droids emerged, their eyes glowing red. Their weapons locked onto Kayla. Ethan gritted his teeth. It was a trap. Hawthorne's voice turned cold. "This war doesn't end today." Ethan raised his weapon. Neither did they. The monster unleashed. The first droid fired. Kayla dodged, moving faster than the human eye could follow. She wasn't just fighting anymore. She was unleashing everything they had tried to suppress. She moved like a blur, her claws slicing through metal, her strength ripping droids apart. Ethan fought beside her, taking down enemies with military precision. But even as they fought, more kept coming. "This isn't working," Ethan growled. Kayla didn't stop. "Then we make it work." She leaped toward the wall, her claws piercing metal, and ripped open an energy panel. Sparks flew. The lights flickered. Then, the power grid failed. The building shook as the system crashed. Droids malfunctioned. Security locks disengage. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Voss, go." The scientist ran forward, plugging the data chip into the system. A screen lit up. Project Dominion. The experiments. The executions. The cover-up. It was all being broadcast. Every soldier, every citizen, everyone was about to see the truth. The end of the lie. Hawthorne's voice returned. But this time, it wasn't calm. It was furious. "Do you kinavo do you do vui? You Donnan." Ethan smirked. "Yeah." A distant explosion shook the city. The people were rising up. The war against lies had begun. Kayla stood beside him, her golden eyes fierce. She had spent her whole life running. Now she was fighting for something bigger. Not revenge. Freedom. The legend of the monster. The world was watching. Across the colony, screens flickered to life, displaying Project Dominion in all its horrifying detail. The experiments, the deaths, the government's betrayal of its own people. The lie that had fueled this war was now exposed. Ethan Cross stood beside Kayla, blood on his uniform, sweat dripping from his brow. His rifle was nearly empty. Behind him, Dr. Elias Voss was still at the terminal, his hand shaking as he forced the system to broadcast the truth to every human outpost in the galaxy. And in that moment, everything changed. The soldiers who had been fighting for the United Earth military were suddenly confronted with a reality they could not ignore. They weren't protecting humanity. They were helping to erase it. But not everyone was ready to surrender. Because General Hawthorne, the man who had orchestrated this war, who had ordered the genocide of Kayla's kind, who had turned Earth's soldiers into executioners, wasn't finished yet, and he was coming for them. The final stand. A deep rumbling filled the air. Ethan turned to the window. In the distance, past the burning skyline, he saw it, an entire fleet of warships descending from orbit. Hawthorne wasn't going to defend himself with words. He was going to bury the truth in fire. "All units," Hawthorne's voice boomed through the speakers. "We are enacting protocol blackout. Any soldier who stands down will be treated as a traitor. Anyone supporting the fugitive will be executed." Ethan's jaw tightened. He's giving the kill order on his own men. Kayla's golden eyes flashed as she turned toward him. "Then we make sure they don't follow it." The soldier's choice. The first wave of enemy troops stormed the building, their armor black, their weapons raised.